March 25th, 2025, Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee meeting. Staff, if you could please do a roll call.
Adams. Present. Bowern. Clark. Hoey.
Here.
Zamer.
Here.
4 present. We're also joined by council members Uso Nane, Richard Conte, Jack Flynn, City Clerk Shaniqua Jackson, and then City Personnel for City Clerk Shaniqua Jackson, Research Council Jake Iceland, Legislative Director Brian Jimenez, Junior Policy Analyst Alyssa Kamara, Assistant Corporation Counsel Jason Thomas, Corporation Counsel Robert McGee, Chief of the Albany Fire Department Joseph Gregory, Commissioner of Water and Water Supply Joseph Coffey, Commissioner of Assessment Trey Kingston, Director of Planning and Development Bradley Glass, Director of Buildings and Regulatory Compliance Richard LaJoy, and Principal Planner Avi Epstein. Apologies if I've missed anybody.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So we're going to start today with Ordinance 68, 12, 124, the accessory dwelling unit section. We're going to move public comment to the end of the meeting, just so we can get the conversation part. We have quite a few department heads here today, and I know some of them have to leave early. Just to give the public some information of how these meetings are set up. When we look to schedule a meeting, the first thing we do is we look at the members' availability to make sure we have enough members to have a meeting. And then beyond that, then we start looking for the professional staff that we may have questions for. So when that occurs, we have sometimes conflicts with different commitments that staff have. So I know we have some staff that have to leave right after 6 o'clock, so I want to make sure we get all the questions to them as quickly as possible. So the way I want to move forward is I'd like the staff to actually come in to the chamber, take the empty seats, so we can have an open conversation back and forth. With the first person I'd like to speak would be our Assessor Trey, who I know has other commitments and has to leave, so that any questions can be that anyone has for Trey, we can get them out in the first half hour, but also so that we can have an open conversation about questions back and forth with all of us, versus having one department go and then another department go. Let's have that open conversation and have that open flow. So if department heads, if you don't mind, take a seat. We got plenty of them with mics, and thank you again for being here. We know you're all here after hours, and we appreciate your willingness and your service to our city. And we'll start with Trey. I'm also going to just make some quick, just some information. This is going to be one of 3 meetings that we're going to have on this subject. So back in October, back in November, December, when we had a compromise on splitting these bills, I made it clear we would have 3 meetings on this subject, and then we would call for a vote. So there will be an up and down vote after the 3rd meeting. But today there will be no vote on this subject. And also I know that this is a subject that's very passionate for lots of individuals, and I want to respect that. But I want to make it clear today is about getting facts and having dialogue versus a debate. We can have the debate at a different meeting, but today we've got all the experts of the fields here. Let's get all the information. Let's have that dialogue. Let's have that active listening, and let's ask some good questions and get some good information. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Dre. Thank you.
So, all right, thank you. I'll just start off by saying, because in my conversations with various council members, I don't think that it had ever come up that we actually do have several accessory dwelling units in the city. The majority of these, we have 12 that fit the criteria of what is being proposed right now, which is on the same parcel as a single family that is, my examples are, these are all detached and less than 800 square feet. Then I have another 14 of them that are between 800 and 1,000 square feet. And then we have a handful that are in this, looked at by my department the same way. However, they're essentially just two individual single-family homes on the same property. So the majority of what we see when it comes to this is the upstairs of a garage being converted to a studio apartment usually. We do have a couple structures that if you looked from like on Google Street View, it actually looks more like a very large shed that's like in the parking lot of Home Depot, but it actually has been converted and insulated and things like that. So we do have some of these in the city existing already. There's a possibility that it's very hard to sift through all the records, that maybe they were on separate parcels at one point and then merged together later. So when it comes to the proposed legislation we have here, I just had a couple of things that I wanted to throw out there for the council to help make this like an efficient piece of, just to make the efficiency better. So the most concerning thing that I see here that I deal with on a daily basis is section AII, is the verification of this, because I am in charge of administering many property tax exemptions that require owner occupancy. And to be perfectly honest with you, nobody wants to hear this, but we have no idea. We do the best we can, and that's what every assessing unit, that's what every municipality does. We can only do the best that you can. The best example is with the STAR exemption. There's no mechanism where we're checking year after year as to if the property is still owner occupied, which is one of the requirements in order to receive the exemption. Now, there's going to be people who intentionally do this, and there's going to be people who just don't know. So the most common thing that we see, but I think would cross over to the accessory dwelling units, would be a property owner who vacates the premises when it comes to occupancy but retains ownership. So somebody that moves from Albany to Colony or to Guilderland or Schenectady even, there's no database that crosses different municipalities in order to notify us that this isn't their primary residence or that it's not owner occupied. It's a complete nightmare. There's the State Department of Tax and Finances, who I deal with, they've done nothing. They don't have any services to like ease it. So it's literally, in order to verify who's entitled to exemptions, it sounds morbid, it is, but we start our day off by going through the obituaries and see who has died in the city. And this is what, not just us, but all other municipalities have to do, which unfortunately leads to somebody coming home from a loved one's funeral and they get an exemption removal notice in the mail that day. But there really is no way to maintain that. So I think in looking at this, we would really want to articulate a clear way that would verify owner occupancy year after year. The next point that I had a question with is the subsection 6 and subsection 7. So an accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 800 square feet of gross area. I know that we do see the word gross area there, but my standards, because the Department of Assessment is a government entity, precluded from entering a building by the Fourth Amendment because it would be considered an illegal search or seizure. Therefore, all of my measurements are from the exterior. So I just want to be clear that maybe we want to talk about adding an extra 10% to account for the fact that if you're talking about living area, I can only gather data that refers to exterior measurements. I see this with the New York State has a couple exemptions that bring in percent of property. This is probably silly, but in number 7, the detached accessory dwelling unit shall not occupy more than 30% of the rear. I see problems even when you think it's clear, but we have a lot of exemptions that 30% must be commercial, certain percent must be residential. How you calculate that always becomes an issue, even when you think it wouldn't. So I think that a clearer definition of what's the rear would be necessary here. Are we talking about where the rear foundation is? Are we talking about, you know, halfway through the house is the rear and halfway to the front is the front? That's about it for the comments I had on this. I know in speaking to some members that you have some more particular questions that I'd be happy to answer. Good time.
Okay, well, two things. I'm gonna allow the sponsor to speak in it. I want to apologize. I don't know me. That's our process. Okay, we'll take questions. Okay, so we're allowed to take questions then. Councilmember Hoey?
Yeah, thank you, Trey. Thank you for coming tonight. I wanted to find out, and one of the main reasons I asked you to come is that I'm a homeowner. I decide I want to put an accessory unit in my backyard. And, you know, and again, I'm just throwing out a rough number. To put a separate building up, if it's not an existing garage or something, my estimate is it'd probably be around at least $100,000. And it's going to be, we have the square footage listed here. What happens to the assessment of the house or the plot of land? Does that change? Would it change right away? And I know that the county's looking at doing like an exemption, 5-year, and then there was another 5-year after. But part B would be, what's the difference between a city tax and a county tax? If you could give us like a rough estimate.
First off, I think that your estimation of the cost of construction is very, very low. You know, I don't think that you're getting half of the materials for that. You know, we look at, and Rick might be able to speak more clearly, but when we look at the building permits, we see what stuff's costing, and you should anticipate it being much more than that. So starting with the county, or the assessment, we don't do appraisals. Appraisals look at individual properties. What we are required to do by the state's guidelines is mass appraisals. So we look at groups of homes in the neighborhood that are similarly situated. Now, with this, so we have, everything is coded with a property class. A single family is a 210, a 2-family is a 220, a 3-family is a 230. So we have so many single-family homes in the city that we can just compare single-family homes in neighborhoods against other single-family homes. We don't have enough just 2 families and enough just 3 families, so we compare all 2 and 3 families against each other. 4 units or more, by state law, you're a commercial property. So what's going to happen to these is properties are assessed based on what comparable properties are selling for on a square foot basis. This is going to shift the property class from a 210 to a 280. A 210, like I said, is a single family residence. A 280 is multiple residences on a single parcel. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to have enough 280s to assess them against each other. I'm going to group them back in with the 210s, and they're going to be assessed as single-family units. So what's going to happen is if a property is assessed at $100 a foot, and there's 800 square feet added, there's going to be $80,000 added to the assessment. So I think that what you may be meaning to ask, or maybe it's going to be a follow-up question, is what's that going to do to the surrounding properties? It's going to, if there is a premium being paid for these properties because there's a revenue stream attached to them, it's going to negatively impact the surrounding properties that aren't receiving that benefit, because they're going to be assessed amongst each other. So, for instance, if we have a street where this never happens, but all the houses are identical and they're all selling for $150 per foot, but then you have 2 at the end that have accessory dwelling units that, because of their revenue stream, are selling for $200 a foot. That's going to be carried into the law of averages. It's going to affect everybody else on the block's assessment. They're going to pay slightly higher taxes, and that is the standards that we're going to be held by. I mean, there's no working around it. Now, when it comes to the county, there might be something that I'm not aware of, but to my knowledge, the county is only dealing with accessory units that are occupied by relatives. So the county doesn't have the legal authority to create tax exemptions on their own. The state needs to create a tax exemption, which is then offered for local option. So what I know about it is that the county has, or they are in the process very close to finalizing the adoption that would exempt the square feet in a house that is occupied by family members. I want to say that it's even more restrictive than that. I want to say that there's specific language that it's for childcare, but I could be wrong. Maybe one draft had it, but that's what that is. The city's tax rate last year was $7 and change per $1,000 of assessed value, and the county's was $2. So the county exemption is going to be a savings, but it's a small percentage of what their overall tax bill will be.
And my other final question right now is if I'm a homeowner and there's a house with an accessory, I'm sorry, I have an accessory dwelling unit and I want to contest my assessment. You kind of touched on it. I would do it against a single family but with the same square footage. Is that what I would need to do?
So ideally, if you have a ranch and you have an accessory dwelling unit in the back, we'd have another 1 or 2 or 3 in the neighborhood. Realistically, that might happen in a few decades, but unless I think that there's going to be some time until we get to the point. Like I said, I don't even have enough data to do 2 and 3 families individually. I group them together. So ideally, what we would do is find something that has an accessory dwelling unit, but if that's not possible, you would find another ranch, preferably in the area, see what it sold for on a square foot basis, and then you could carry that over. When it comes to in-law apartments, which is a separate property class in and of itself, which is a 215, that's what we do. That's what we have to do because we only have identified about under 30 in the city, and they are treated as if they're just single-family homes.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Rich?
So when you talk about, just mentioning in-law apartments, an in-law apartment, is that more typically a part of the main structure and
Yes.
not a separate unit?
Yes.
Or not a separate dwelling?
It's not codified necessarily in the RPTL, but when it comes to the property classes that are issued, 215 is an in-law apartment and 280 is a separate dwelling
Okay.
unit on the same parcel. So by logic, it is in the same structure.
And if I'm reading this right, an accessory dwelling unit does not necessarily have to be a separate structure. It could be, say, of the primary house. Could it be converting, say, maybe the second floor to a separate unit with a common entrance?
Yeah, that's how I read it as well, but I think that...
In which case, would that then de facto become a two-family house, and that would be a 220 or whatever?
So the two-family house versus an in-law apartment is discretionary. To me, there's no definition anywhere. What I really look at is if it's less than 25% of the
Right.
total square foot, that's where we'll start to consider it. But it's discretionary, but that's been our standard. So if you're adding, if you have a 1,200 square foot house and you add 800 square feet,
Mhm.
that's a different story where it might not be attached. It might not be a 215, it might be a 220, two-family house.
And then in the beginning, in answer to Tom's question, if I heard you correctly, you indicated that the assessment impact or the tax impact within a neighborhood would have the effect of increasing the tax on that whole area, or the assessed
Well-
value basically of all because of the...
Yeah, but also I'm reactionary, to what the market does. So
Right, right.
I'm just assuming that there's going to be a premium paid for the parcels that include, for the single-family homes that include an extra revenue stream. Making that assumption, yes, that would carry over it would weight the average for the houses that do not include one.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from any members or any staff members have any questions for today? Okay. Going once. Going. Oh. Okay. Councilman Adams and then Councilman Manani.
Yeah, thank you for joining for that clarification, but just to piggyback off of that comment, how soon would people see that tax increase if accessory dwellings were to start being built? Because if it's a costly expense to build one, the likelihood may be that it's slow to get a lot of people to join in, and then to that point that you made earlier in terms of how you're grouping things together and assessing them, if it's just that one single accessory dwelling unit on the block, on the whole street, how much really does that weigh into things for an increase to be felt by neighbors?
So if
In your
you have
opinion.
one on the block and even a crazy premium is paid, it's going to be the law of averages. It's not going to be like costly to the point of forcing anybody out of their house or anything like that. You know, we're probably talking, we're probably realistically talking about less than $100, you know, depending on what the tax rate is. The issue would be if we're working with a small sample size, because while we do mass appraisals, we group neighborhoods together, but then we have to look closer at specific property or specific structure styles. So like a colonial, a ranch, a raised ranch, they're all going against each other. So like there's a lot of areas of the city where there's hundreds, thousands of the same property. You know, row houses downtown, a lot of ranches in Councilman Huey's area. So if you are an unlucky, there's no other way to put it, if you're unlucky and there's only 6 raised ranches in the general vicinity, and only 2 of them have sold in the last couple of years, and one of them has an accessory dwelling unit that sold for, you know, 20% more than it would have if it didn't have that, it's going to be felt. It's going to be felt because my sales data is going to be limited to that sale. If you're talking about just to use Councilman Huey's area again, because I remember looking it up and there's like 700 ranches. If you're talking about that and you have even a dozen accessory dwelling units that sell for a premium, it's not going to impact very much at all, because just the law of averages is going to bring it back down to the mean.
Thank you. Councilmember Seema?
Thank you, and thanks for being here. Just real quick, so also, if a house on a block, if a ranch puts on an addition or makes substantive improvements to the house, wouldn't that also
Yes.
contribute to raising the value of all the houses grouped
So
with it?
in the mass appraisals, which is different than like I said earlier, we're not looking at an individual property. So there's a theory in assessment of using just the law of averages. So it's mostly spoken referring to rental properties, apartments, but we assess everything based on average. So if you put a new kitchen in, you're not necessarily going to get an increase of assessment. And the rationale behind that is you don't want to punish good landlords by increasing assessments for taking care of their property, and you don't want to reward absent landlords for not taking care of their property with a lower assessment. Adding square foot's a different story, though. So if you change the square foot in your residence, that's going to change your assessment, but it's not going to affect your neighbors, because if you were at $130 per square foot with 1,300 feet, you're going to be at $130 a foot with 1,600 feet.
Okay. So are there any other, so this is sort of a unique situation, that ADU, that could increase this, or are there other situations?
The in-law apartment is similar, but the problem with that is when I took over this office, we had 0 documented. And I knew that wasn't true because I grew up in one. So we've only picked up what we've come across. You know, we don't have the ability to go out to every single property. So we've only picked up 20, 25 of those properties as we have come across them doing inspections or just word of mouth, things like that. That's the other example where it's kind of the same thing because it has an extra revenue stream.
Okay. And sorry, my last question, the ADUs that you mentioned at the beginning that are already present in the city, those are not permitted, or have they been granted?
I don't have the answer to that. Some other people here may, but
Okay.
I did throw out
Save that question.
that those could have been on separate parcels to start with and then merge later.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Rich and then Tom.
I don't know if this is for you, Trey, or who else might be. It does relate to enforcement. One is, that either the ADU or the primary residence has to be owner occupied. That's an enforcement. I think you touched on that. But the other part had a question about is what happens when if the property goes up for sale. Does it have to be, and I don't know if this is your question, a question for you or someone else, does it have to be marketed in a way that a requirement that the purchaser has to occupy as a primary residence? And how is that enforced, and does it have an effect on sales? I mean, I don't know who that belongs to, but.
So I don't think it's 100% on me, but yeah, in just looking into some things in the last couple of days, and maybe people have information to the contrary, but there does seem to be a lot of issues with that requirement, especially in Ithaca and Syracuse. And Ithaca's website, as of today, said that it's still up for debate whether or not they're allowed to require their owner occupancy. I know that there's a Court of Appeals case from 1976 or 1978 which speaks to that, where from what I could tell shepherdizing it was still good law, but it speaks to the municipality's ability to control the use on a parcel, but they have no say in the occupancy of a parcel. So that I tried to reach out to the city of Syracuse today, and I didn't get a call back yet to see like what other information they had. While saying that, I also do acknowledge that other municipalities seem to have owner occupancy requirements for their ADUs. So I don't know if it's been adjudicated further and it's okay, or if nobody's challenged it yet.
And that might be a question for corporate counsel in terms of how that, when there's a sale, how that is enforced, and requiring that the new owner be a primary occupant of one of the structures. Because then that has an effect on whether or not the property can be sold, or the marketability of the property potentially.
Yeah.
Depending on, someone might want to buy as an investment property with the intention of renting out both, but under this they couldn't. But how do you? I don't know.
Okay.
Oh.
So, wait, I'm gonna allow, I think that's a question for Corporation Counsel. We did not formally invite Corporation Counsel, just because we have such a packed room already. But, that may be a question we'll ask Corporation Counsel inviting, and maybe they can get us an answer for that. So if staff can just make sure they take down that question, and maybe we'll invite Corporation Counsel to our next one. And try to get some of these answers, these legal answers, settled. I think Tom had his hand up, then
Sure.
Usu, then Deb, and I do know I have a 7-minute time frame before our assessor has to go.
I can be a little late.
Okay.
Can I ask a procedural question?
Sure.
So all the department heads can jump in if the question is relevant to them, right? We don't have to wait their turns? I just wanted to reiterate that. If there's a question asked that you think you're best suited to answer, please do.
Trey, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I had heard that with 2 or more units, like in this type of situation, that the federal discrimination law does not apply. Do you know anything about that in your
It's
And you
2 or
work-
less units in New York State.
Okay.
So I think the federal standard is 4 or less units, and then the state has a lesser criteria. So anything with 2 or less units, I do not believe that, I'm sorry, the terms of art are slipping my memory, that you are allowed to discriminate, I guess is how it would be phrased, of who you rent to, if it's owner occupied.
Okay, and that's something we can bring up with Corporation Council also. I didn't mean to hit you with the legal stuff. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councilman Nani?
Yeah, my question is more so with your position, is there anything that you could, share positive, how this could impact our city just to moving forward? Is there any positive thing you guys?
Yeah, and I'll first say that I wasn't, it might have sounded negative, but I wasn't, I'm not negative at all. It's just, I think that as this is an open discussion, the goal should be to write the legislation as ironclad as possible to not see any unexpected issues. And just dealing in my experience when it comes to like verifying occupancy, next to impossible. When it comes to dealing with percentages, it's all over the place. But I mean, ultimately, on a positive note, we're talking about creating. I mean, the way that I see it starting out would be people creating structures for their parents, other family members, things of that nature, and then we really would run into Councilmember Conti's problem of the sale down the road, if it's marketable. But it would definitely create more of the nuclear family that I think is always talked about but not available by allowing a structure which may not be feasible to be expanded in a way to add living quarters on it, like an in-law apartment, and also like an independent structure like that, that's not connected, that provides privacy, things like that. And then on the flip side, a lot of people's first home is a 2-family, so that they can mitigate their mortgage payment. This is another opportunity for something like that, but as we see the 2 families being bought up by the investors throughout the city, this would be an opportunity for somebody to create their own business in that sense, for lack of a better term. Because as you saw last year when I was here, nobody was very happy with how much 2 and 3 families are going for, because they're being scooped up by the same dozen investors throughout the city. So if somebody was willing to undertake the financial burden of constructing this on their premises, they don't have to worry about a bidding war for a 2-family house. They can create it right there where they are.
Final question, Deb.
My question is just about a certificate of occupancy. Is that too future of a question, or is that appropriate for now? So, Mr. LaJoy, so would an ADU be privy to the same CO process as anything? And does it make a difference if it's if it's family relatives that are occupying it, or renters that are strangers?
So if it's a homeowner occupied, meaning a family member, immediate family member is occupying that space, then they would not be required to get the ROP, you know, that you do when you rent it to somebody that's not related to you.
So somebody who builds a new structure, a homeowner who builds a structure for their aging parents in their backyard do not need an ROP.
That's correct.
But if they're going to put it on Airbnb,
They would.
so that's like another level that we would have to consider in the legislation, how to account for that, I would think. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Trey, because we're about to lose him? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you again. I know you made some family arrangements to be able to make it here today, so we appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue. I know planning has a presentation. I'm going to ask planning if you can go and next, and if you can go quickly to the presentation, just so we can get some good facts. And then also, I just want to make just restate what Councilwoman Seaman said, that, you know, we love the input from the department heads. So if you hear something that you have a question on, please don't hesitate to ask a question. Don't hesitate to, you know, give us your feedback. That's the goal of this meeting. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Ali Epstein, Principal Planner with the Planning Department. I'll do my best to keep this presentation brief. So we have accessory dwelling units in terms of how we are defining it, which is gone over already. It's currently in the USDO, so the definition for the specific use with this amendment would not be changed. It would remain as is. Also, as discussed previously, there's various types of ADUs, so we're looking at attached ADUs, detached. They can be internal, whether it's in the basement or other areas of the house, second floor, first floor, so on. But they would all be regulated under the same requirements for accessory dwelling units. Some of the general benefits associated with ADUs, increasing much needed housing opportunities and options. We have additional housing for seniors to age in place. This is strongly supported by a lot of research, specifically from AARP and other research that's available. ADUs are smaller, take up less space, including land. They can be within a unit, so they are often considered to be a more sustainable housing option. They offer, you know, the cost of construction generally right now is quite expensive for anything, but generally is considered to be lower construction costs than you would see for a larger single unit or 2-unit or conventional dwelling. And then existing accessory or family dwelling units could become conforming to the zoning code. You know, we had heard earlier from Trey that there are some existing ADUs or things like ADUs already, so this ordinance could make those conforming to the existing code. So there's some research by AARP and others surveying 2,800 adults, this one I believe from in New York State, and just looking at the consideration of those of seniors in that they would like to be able to essentially live in place, be closer to family, having some degree of independence. Many of them, 62%, said they would consider building an ADU on their property to provide housing for a loved one. in need of care and to have an affordable place to live. And this same information or same data is shown throughout other studies that we've taken a look at as well. Looking at ADUs from the state and county level, so I know this has come up tonight. Albany County proposing a tax to the real property tax exemption. There's also, on New York State level, there is the +1 ADU program, which is allocated $85 million in funding over 5 years. So this is for the construction of a new ADU or for the renovation of an ADU. To be eligible for a lot of these programs, it would have to be a new building unless you're doing the renovation. These programs, there are multiple municipalities across the state that are utilizing this. I know locally Troy is an example of one that utilizes this program to create some housing. There are also some other bills that have been previously introduced a couple years back, and as well as early as January, for additional provisions to allow ADUs statewide. They kind of similarly follow provisions that are seen in states like Massachusetts and Connecticut. Endorsements, the governor has been quite vocal about supporting ADUs, specifically mentioning the ADU +1 program. The head of HCR, or Homes and Community Renewal, has been highly in support, and recently just the comments from the county executive, Dan McCoy, in support of ADUs as well. And we're looking at ADUs across New York State and nationwide. So we have a lot of, there's variations for what local municipalities will regulate, so it differs from one place to the other, but ADUs, and known by many other names, are allowed in many municipalities across the state, several dozen. A little more locally, Troy, Colony, Bethlehem, Rensselaer, Clifton Park, Guilderland, Schenectady are some of the few that allow it. There are also 13 states that either have legalized ADUs statewide or have made it significantly easier to construct or renovate part of a property into an ADU by removing some of the barriers. When looking at the city of Albany, I think we all are quite aware of some of the challenges with the housing availability and costs. More broadly speaking, some of the reports that have come out looking at the region is that as a region, we don't produce enough housing for the growing population. We have housing scarcity contributing to rising prices. We're seeing rising mortgage gaps and wage gaps, so that's affecting both the rental side and the home ownership side. We also have homeowners who are aging who are looking to retain their properties or stay in place, which is a good thing, but it also leads to less properties being on the market, which we have seen by looking at the information from GCAR. And then the lack of housing options in various neighborhoods, that can sometimes lead to a concentration of housing in certain areas of the city. We looked at the change in the median sales price over 5 years. I'm sure this isn't surprising to people, but there was a 53% increase from 2020 to 2025 for the median sales price. Some other statistics in our consideration of this is there is quite a significant shift in the demographics. If we're looking at the persons per household, in 1960 this was about 3.9, and this is for the city of Albany. In 2023, according to the census, it was about 2.04. There's also some significant differences between the household breakdowns, and we're looking at what we consider a traditional family or nuclear family, and then a non-family household. So we can see that the population of those has kind of swung, and we're seeing more non-traditional households. A lot of that has to do with more single people looking for places, more people who are unrelated who are living together. The other point to make with the per person's household is that if you were to keep the numbers of people the same, you're going to need about 50%, I believe it's 53 or 56% more housing structures to accommodate the same number of people because the persons per household has changed. So it's quite a significant increase when we're looking at the difference between 1960 and more recent numbers from 2023. And then we looked at aligning, how does this proposal align with the city's goals, specifically in the comprehensive plan. The main components here are that the comp plan really calls for providing a diverse mix of housing opportunities for renters and homeowners alike. More specifically, it calls for having those diverse housing options throughout the city and being able to have a diverse, housing in various neighborhoods. It also calls for removing various barriers to aging in place and for adopting zoning and development regulations that kind of incentivize different types of development and really looks at the missing middle, which ADUs is a part of that solution. Just go through a couple maps that we have here. So here's just looking at zoning districts by the general type. I'm sure it's a little hard to see on the screen, but it's in the printouts as well. These are kind of just clustered groups, so we took the zoning districts that exist and kind of categorized or grouped them together. So we see single unit zones in yellow, for example, 2 units, 2 residential units or above in orange, and so on. What you see now on the screen in red, those are where all the single unit dwellings are throughout the city. So you can really see that while yes, they are in the single unit zoning districts, they're also scattered throughout the city. And while they're in the mixed use districts as well, you can see that they're scattered throughout, single unit zones, additional residential districts, and mixed use. So this ordinance wouldn't just be for single unit zoning districts, it would really apply to single units throughout, regardless of what zoning district they're in. We look at some of the non-conforming existing dwelling units. Again, it's a little hard to see on here, but if you're looking kind of towards the middle of the map, there are a lot, several hundred buildings that are non-conforming dwelling units throughout. What we're seeing here is in yellow is the single unit zoning districts. That would be your R1L and R1M zones. And then in red are the properties that are non-conforming. And the ones shown on the map are just 2 units, 3 units, and apartment buildings. It's not including any non-residential structures. We look at percentage of population that is 60 years and above. We can see that there's a concentration of 30% of the population in certain areas. This also correlates with the areas that are more often than not owner occupied and that are also typically single unit zoning districts. So being able to provide housing options in those districts that are more contextual to the character of their neighborhoods and that are more in line with the properties next door. Here we have a map of the percentage of housing owners versus renters occupied. So again, just kind of comparing this to the previous map, you can see the clear similarities between where you have some older populations, where you have owner occupancy versus renters, where you have single family zoning, and where you have a lot of the single family units throughout the city. So the idea here being trying to provide solutions for housing that address some of the problems that, yes, might apply throughout the city, but also apply to areas that are currently a little bit harder to provide solutions for because the zoning restricts the types of housing available. And lastly, here we have a cost burden owner-occupied households. So this is the cost burden for those who own their property. The number here, just like it is across the nation, is rising pretty steadily. So cost burden is anyone who spends 30% or more on of their income on their housing. So in this case, a mortgage. We can see, again, that's, it is clustered in certain areas, but it's pretty widespread throughout the city. And some of the research more regionally also indicated that about 22% of all senior households are currently cost burdened for those that own or have a mortgage, rather. So this is a potential opportunity for those to be able to provide some type of income to offset those increasing costs. When we look at the proposed ordinance itself, currently accessory dwelling units is mentioned in the code in the permitted use table, but all the cells are left blank. What we would be proposing is just to add them as accessory so that they would have, the unit would have to be accessory to something else to the principal use, which would be a single unit dwelling. In all the districts with the exception of the 2 industrial districts and the land conservation district. And then the use-specific standards that you see at the right-hand side, that's where a lot of the provisions on this slide would apply. So just kind of calling out that this is applicable to accessory units are to be for single unit detached dwellings, that there's no more than one ADU per lot, limiting it to 800 square feet, as well as just kind of highlighting that there's existing limits on the height, setback, and lot coverage. I know there was a question that had come up before about kind of evaluating the lot coverage for the accessory dwelling unit if it's in like the rear. That is something we kind of currently do, let's say for just a garage in general that doesn't include an accessory dwelling unit. We look to make sure it meets those requirements for impervious lot coverage, setbacks, building height, to make sure it meets the code. So this would just fall in that same category. And then also the other elements here that it was restricted to not be for short-term rentals, and that the unit be primary accessory to the unit that is occupied. That's the relatively brief version here, and if there's questions on any of the slides or information that was handed out, happy to go through that.
That was fast, thank you. I saw this packet, I'm like, whoa, this is gonna be here for a while. But no, thank you. Any questions for planning? Tom?
Yeah, thank you again. One of the slides you mentioned the increase in population, and I didn't get the percentage. And that's why we need more housing, because it's going up. So do you remember what that number was? It was way back. Yeah.
Tom, I think another thing just to add to that is the size of the household is going down. So even if the population isn't going up, there's still a demand for more units. That's
Okay. And it was about the population, but I could have sworn he had a number, and I just don't remember what it
Yeah, I don't have the number on the exact population in this slide, but we can provide that.
Yeah, and again, and the reason I want to bring up, and you did point out a good thing, Brad, if the city is increasing in size and population, now we have more buildings, we have fire safety, we have police, we have emergency services like ambulance, are we going to be increasing that? Right now with police, we're down 90 officers out of a 350-member force. If we're encouraging growth in the city, what are we doing about the support services? Is that something planning looks at when we're coming up with stuff?
I mean, in a sense, I'd say, more holistically, you're using a lot of the same utilities that are in place. You're putting housing in areas that are already being policed and served by those providers. It's not larger scale development, which might require a whole additional set of reviews and inspections. Say it's smaller scale, it's, in some sense, there's certainly some complications, as we've discussed here tonight, in some of the enforcement mechanisms, but generally speaking, it doesn't seem to be adding capacity beyond what the city has to kind of accommodate the growth.
Well, and let's talk about, I want to argue that, because and when I say argue, I would respectfully disagree. One of the problems we're seeing with the Airbnbs up in the 15th Ward, because we have a lot of these single-family homes, is parking. People are parking on a main road, Russell Road, which is a very small road. I had to have no parking signs put up. I drive by some of these houses, they're parking on the lawn, they're parking, they have 10 cars. I mean, we really got to look at the growth. And I know, some of the arguments are, well, people are taking mass transit, but in certain areas of the city where we don't have sidewalks, we don't have facilities right now, the only way you can get around is to drive. I know at Eagle Point School, we don't have sidewalks going to the school, and the school district won't bus you unless you live a mile and a half away. So, is this part of the planning that we're going to put more accessory units, more people are going to be living there. We don't know who, if it's a parent, might move into the accessory unit and then rent out the house to their kids, and they're going to have family. We're going to have more traffic. So, and that's one of my concerns. But, I mean, everything can be dealt with, but it's just that we need to let the public know that we're looking at it. We're not just willy-nilly, let's just expand. Because expanding not all the time, it might bring in more revenue, but there's more services that you've got to provide. And that's, I look to planning to do that and to come up with those type of numbers.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of parking, it's ADUs are actually a pretty good solution for that. It's one of the lowest generators of additional parking. So it's actually a great way to add contextual housing options without increasing the amount of parking that's going to be needed everywhere. You know, for some of the other sites, and it's also based on the type of users. You know, if you're limiting the unit to 800 square feet, you're kind of, in essence, already limiting how many people are going to be in that unit. And as we're kind of see here too, with the persons per household and having more single or two-person households, you have less and less dependence on needing more vehicles.
Tom, I don't want to deflect from the point, but I did want to jump in and support you on sidewalks for Russell Road. I do think that's really needed out there. So.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I might have a question later, but thank you again, I appreciate it.
Okay, Hyde and then Rich.
Thanks. I just wondered if part of the analysis looked at how many properties actually could support a separate, like, detached accessory dwelling, because I think that's probably one of the bigger concerns here. And when I look at existing setbacks, existing lot coverage, existing build-out, cost of construction, I don't think we're talking about that many properties, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's a hard analysis to do. Short answer is no, we don't have it like the exact numbers because we don't have all the data for, you know, we have some like the frontage and lot sizes, but some of that is incomplete. Some of the properties have odd configurations, so it's not 100%. From what we have looked at and from what I know from a lot of the areas that we kind of looked at previously that are in some of the less dense areas, a lot of the properties are already pretty close to their 30% maximum coverage. So the extent to which they'd be able to put a detached structure is going to be limited. You know, we see that already just with people trying to come in for a garage that's, you know, a fraction of the size and being already up against those requirements. We certainly have plenty of lots that don't have the width or depth to accommodate a detached structure. Now they could potentially accommodate an internal ADU. That's a little bit harder to identify. We've looked at some of it's at this point a bit dated, I think 2017 or 2019 data on impervious coverage from the county. And a lot of the lots are fairly close to their maximum or you know, near it. So I think it would be more applicable to properties that maybe have an existing garage that could convert it. Not to say that, I mean, there's plenty of properties where people could put a new structure, but I think to your point, it's probably slightly overstated as to how many people are going to build an ADU. I know from looking at some of the other local municipalities, I think the one with the most ADUs by far, or at least detached, would be Colony, which has a larger population and more single unit dwellings like this. They have about 50 to 60 ADUs total.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think that part sounds like wow, we're gonna have all these structures, but I just, practically speaking, I don't see it. From a drafting standpoint, you know, we're going from ADUs not permitted anywhere. We have this language, just wondering if we've looked at like comprehensive plan, make sure that fits in, and I'm just trying to understand why the original ordinance prohibited it completely, and now you know, it's a big jump. And also just from drafting, if there's other sections that we have to change as well, because I know accessory structures are kind of throughout the code.
So I would just say, Hyde, we did propose this in the original USDO in 2017, and I think over time we're becoming more and more of an outlier with our peers on this. I think the Colony Law was passed in 2018, so there's no change there, and we believe that it was consistent with the comprehensive plan then and continues to be now.
And that's what it seemed to be. I wasn't saying necessarily that we're inconsistent, just trying to understand why it was completely prohibited initially. But then just on the rest of the code, have we looked at if there's other areas, just so we're not creating this kind of in a bubble and then we have other sections that aren't going to be consistent?
Yeah, I think for, I guess, just the USDO specifically, this ordinance is relatively simple in that sense, where it's really just affecting that section. There's already the provisions about accessory setbacks, height limitations, the impervious coverage. So if we were to stick really with the numbers we have there, I don't see the need to adjust the other ones, and that could always be something that's revisited at a later time. There could be provisions or additional provisions you want to add for use-specific standards, but that's already a, kind of a carve-out in the code. So any minor changes like that, I don't see as being a difficult task to include in the USDO.
That's it for now.
Okay, I'm gonna let Megan go, and then I'll let you go. I think she had some statements she wanted to make real quick.
I just wanted to respond to Councilmember Clark with some sort of context for, I think some of our predecessors had some significant resistance to the concept of having things in place that would eliminate R1 districts in the city, which in a sense this legislation does, although I don't think it will significantly impact the look and feel of R1 neighborhoods and the way that some folks perceive the legislation may. But that was my understanding, was that, by allowing for ADUs, you would essentially eliminate R1 districts because they would become legal everywhere, essentially making any particular property or parcel potentially more than one unit.
Okay, Councilmember Conti?
As a predecessor, yeah, we did have this discussion back in 2017, was it, Brad, I think, or when we were discussing amendments to the USDO?
2017, I think again in
Yeah,
2021.
yeah, and there were a couple of issues that we kind of put a paperclip on for the next council to decide, but there wasn't consensus back then, and there was language, I thought, in that we put in that had a trigger if certain things happened, but
I think when we did the review in 2021, it was one of the things we were required to look at.
right.
But I think there were so many issues we just got overwhelmed with that we didn't have a chance to deal
Yeah.
with it at that point in time. And I think previously you were correct, in 2017 there was some resistance, and again, in getting the whole package through, obviously.
Yeah, and we didn't have time to deal with every issue, and Megan is correct, that was one of the issues that was a concern to some members in terms of, but it was not rejected, it was just felt that we didn't have enough time to deal with that, and there were some other topics at the time we were doing the cleaning up the USDO with a bunch of issues that we didn't deal with the first time. But I had just a quick clarifying question. When we talk about detached dwelling, I assume that's a dwelling that was built as to be a detached dwelling, as opposed to a row house, a one-family row house that might have vacant lots on each side, which then, by virtue of the vacancies, is detached, but it's not what you mean by detached. Is that?
I think I understand. So, I mean, there are detached single-unit dwellings typically. So you're going to have a larger setback on the sides. You have townhouse structures, which would have to be within like 3.5 feet of the adjacent property line. So they could technically be, detached. Is still a townhouse-style structure, though. So that's like it's classified as its own use under the zoning code. I don't know if that answers a little bit of what you're getting at.
Yeah, so like, in certain neighborhoods, I represent down at Center Square, that area, there are other areas down here, Arbor Hill, which are traditional, like row houses, I should say, maybe row house is the more appropriate one, which were built as attached houses, but you might have a vacancy on each side so that the row house itself stands with vacant lots on each side. The row house might be a one-family, but it's not attached at that point, although it's clearly would be in a zoning district where a 2 or 3 unit would be allowed, but otherwise you could have, if the issue I'm trying to get at is, as opposed to a conversion of part of the building a separate structure on the lot, assuming that there might be enough, which would not be the optimal way of going versus Is that all clear? You know what I'm saying?
I think so. It's gotta like visualize it a little bit. For a townhouse dwelling, there's no structures on the other sides of it, if it still meets that definition of a townhouse dwelling, then it wouldn't be, under the way the current amendment is written, an ADU would not be eligible for that property.
Right.
But if it had a larger setback, therefore it technically qualifies or is defined as a single unit detached, then it would qualify for the accessory dwelling unit.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? I see your hand, Tom. Okay, so I'm gonna let you ask your last question, Tom, just because I want to get this moving.
Sure.
So,
And real fast, I heard that, you mentioned Colony, and I wasn't aware of that. Is the zoning in Colony right across the board, so you can put an accessory dwelling unit throughout Colony, or is it just in certain zoned areas? And do you know what their experience has been? I mean, this is good that they've done it, we can look at it, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And some of the questions I have is what they did about addresses, like for the mail delivery, garbage pickup, but I think Colony, you have to pay for it. But I'm just wondering how it would work when we do it. And, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's hard to keep all the different municipalities, straight. I think that it's across the board. I think they might have some slight differentiations for different districts, but I don't believe it differs for the zoning districts, more so some of the like use-specific regulations in terms of like the size of the structure, but I believe it's allowed in all their residential and mixed-use zoning districts. I think they might have the same or similar provisions where they don't have it in any like industrial or heavy commercial areas. I do know a large component of their code and parts of their ADU ordinance are quite old. They have revised other sections of it, but a lot of the language, I think, well, I'm not sure what they think, but could probably use a little bit of updating to kind of meet where some of the other intention of where they're going with ADUs is. We can certainly reach out and find out about the other components of the enforcement, trash, stuff like that. I haven't heard anything specifically. I do know from Troy and others, like they're not seeing a ton of applications. It's typically ones that they've seen before, or some of the properties that might be like non-conforming kind of coming forward and applying for those ADUs, but they're not seeing a whole rush of new applications. And that's generally why the state has put out these different programs, whether it's the tax incentive or the +1 ADU, to kind of incentivize creating more, because they're not seeing as many as they hoped.
Thank you.
okay, I'm gonna ask some very quick question, and then we'll move on. So I just want to be clear. This would only allow one ADU on a one-unit property. It would not allow you to put an ADU on a 2 or more unit property, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And it has the limit of 800 feet. Is there that's the maximum it can be. What's the limit of, how small can it be?
There's no limit for the ADU itself. I would say that's more up to like the habitable space under the code. So Rick would know better. I think that's like 120 square feet for living area, and then like 70 square feet for a kitchen or something like that.
When this was first brought up, that was my main concern, was that that we weren't accepting or going to pass something that didn't meet the building code, because I was afraid that 800 square foot wasn't big enough, because I know we had an instance a couple years ago with a house that was going to be built, and it was like, I think about 600 square feet, and that was not large enough for habitable space. So as long as the burden's going to be on the applicant, but that 800 foot is probably as close to the minimum that you can you can be anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, planning. So, since we've had two from this side, we're gonna jump onto the other side, with Chief, just to like, give us any of your thoughts, any of your concerns, and, any of your input, and thank you again for being here.
Sure. Good evening. I'll try and make this as brief as possible, but on behalf of the Albany Fire Department, we appreciate the opportunity to join the discussion on ADUs. We'd like to be clear, though, to start off, that we don't have any specific stance or opinion on these dwellings and how they're categorized or legalized. We're strictly here to present some thoughts purely from the public safety world and the public safety point of view. I'm pretty confident that everybody here knows that the Albany Fire Department and our members will respond and won't hesitate to respond to any place and serve anywhere we're called. So we just wanted to make that, preface our initial presentation here. But we do have some concerns to talk about briefly, and then we'll discuss some key issues that we have come up with. So some of the fire department concerns are the potential issues with the access for firefighting equipment, not just our apparatus, but also our accessory equipment. The second concern of ours is the limited fire separation between the ADUs and the main dwelling, if it's not attached. As we know, fire spreads rapidly and quickly, and that's a main concern of ours. Another concern is the potential confusion regarding occupant location during a fire or emergency, just so that areas are clearly identified and our members are able to access those areas quickly to afford any safety measures that they need to take care of. And the added complexity of managing multiple living units within a single property. Again, it's the fact that if one occupant in one portion of the residence doesn't realize there's an emergency in the other portion of the residence, and if it's not clearly identified and identifiable to our responders, whether it be police, fire, EMS, that could present an issue. So we broke down some of the key issues that we thought were pertinent with regard to ADUs, and we just have three quick topics to go over. The first, again, to reiterate, is the fire department accessibility. Access difficulties. When we look at, and we saw some of the great visuals that planning put up, but access difficulties, narrow driveways, limited space around the ADUs, or poorly designed access points that hinder the ability of our apparatus to reach the structure and deploy our equipment effectively. Access for trucks, fire apparatus. In densely populated areas, navigating our apparatus to reach the ADU could be challenging, rather challenging for us. And the fire separation concerns. If the ADU is not properly separated from the main dwelling with fire-resistant construction, a fire could quickly spread between those two units. Another topic for one of the key issue topics that we looked at too is occupancy. Occupancy confusion, where our firefighters and responders, police officers, firefighters, may struggle to quickly identify the location of the occupants within the ADUs. A fire could quickly spread between those two units, and identifying those areas would be a detriment to our members. The increased occupancy load. Adding an ADU to a property means more people living in smaller areas, which can complicate evacuation procedures and increase the potential number of people at risk at a fire. And limited egress paths. Proper fire escape routes can be difficult to design in smaller ADUs, particularly when attached to existing structures. So those are some of the occupancy issues that we have looked at. And lastly, the operational aspect of it from our fire department operations. It could present an increased workload. Responding to a fire in an ADU often requires additional resources and coordination compared to a single-family dwelling, as firefighters need to manage multiple potential fire origins and occupants. A second one under our operational issues would be limited visibility. The smaller size and potentially concealed nature of an ADU can make it difficult for our firefighters to quickly access a situation and locate a fire's origin and/or a person in need of emergency medical services. From a fire standpoint, proximity to other structures. ADUs built close to property lines or other homes can quickly spread to adjacent buildings. And fire-rated construction requirements. It would just be that we would, and again, as Director LaJoy and I were talking about earlier, I mean, a lot of this coincides with the code enforcement portion of it. Ensuring that the ADUs meet the appropriate fire-resistant building codes, including wall and ceiling assemblies. And that can be complex and could be major additional costs. So, we don't like to come here, and for many of you who know me, we don't like to present something and just talk about the bad things, so we'd like to talk about what kind of solutions could mitigate some of these issues. Strict building code enforcement. You know, we would hope that that would be in place and backed up by the ordinances or whatever the process as we go through. A major thing for, again, from a public safety standpoint is the clear signage and markings, requiring clear identification of ADU entrances and occupant locations to facilitate a rapid response of our public safety service. And last but not least, to follow up on our planning, collaboration with local planning departments. We always look at working with local authorities to ensure the new ADU developments incorporate fire safety measures into zoning regulations. So those are just some of the, in a nutshell, those are some of the considerations that we've come up with, and we hope that you take into consideration as you develop your decision-making here as we go through this legislative process to look at these particular types of units. So that's our information.
Thank you. Any questions? Vish and then Tom.
Yeah, just clarification, because I'm just wondering the difference between when you respond to either a fire or an EMS call downtown, you know, in a row house area, it's densely populated, you might not know which unit, et cetera. Is the difference if you're responding to an area where it's predominantly, as far as you know, basically, you know, one family detached, that you don't know whether whether there's an ADU there or not, and that might, based on your perception of the situation, might color the response versus, say, a response in a downtown like row house district?
It's a great question. I think that because of the way that the system is set up, the areas are clearly identifiable now. And when you're talking about the Midtown area here, Center Square, even though we do have row houses here or down in our south end, you know, and over in Arbor Hill we have row houses, and we've had issues with row houses and rapid fire spread. And you've seen how we we escalate the call rapidly for that. But it's the fact that if the area is not clearly identifiable, I mean, the books will tell you fire doubles every 30 seconds. But we all know that fire grows rapidly here. So it's just a matter of identifying where the issue is and being able to take care of our operation at that point. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, and I had just brought that up, one of the questions with planning, but it might be another department. What you brought up, I have an accessory unit in the back. The people there have an emergency. They called, it's a heart attack, and they need to get, you know, the fire department's the first one to respond. Do we give that a separate address? How do we know, how do we let you know that it's not the main house in the front, but there's a dwelling in the back, and that's where the call's coming from? And the people who live there should know, you know, what address do they use? So where does that come in with the post office? And, identification for emergency services. Does any of the commissioners here have any idea, or?
I don't have that answer. I mean, that's something that also to factor in would be to incorporate information into our computer-aided dispatch system, so that we'd be able to have that information readily available, and so for our responding units, whether it be police or fire.
And I don't know Postal Service speaking, but I can tell you, we require identifiers. It has to be numbered, it has to be visible, no different than any other apartment in the city. So it would absolutely have to be identifiable for any first responder showing up.
So my house is 19 Vine, I have an accessory in the back. Would it be like 19A or B, or?
Yeah, numbering purposes, I don't know how that, the post office is who, makes that call. If it's a unit within the building as as an in-law apartment, whatever, that probably does not need to be identified, but a separate living unit, that's specifically detached like that would require something. I mean, it would be no different than they're gonna want mail, right? So they're gonna have to deal with that as well.
Just going to add, we typically work with the county's 911 dispatch for addressing, more so for larger projects, but oftentimes it's all under one parcel number, but there might be separate units. So it's certainly something we can bring to them and just ask if they have a standard numbering system they would use.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members or any members? Okay. Thank you, and we may have more questions as we go along. But thank you again for being here. We'll go Rick, and then we'll go Joe.
My only concerns were the same as the assessor, and as it relates to verifying, who's living there, and if it's being if it's being rented less than 30 days. We have no way to verify that. A pinky swear is about as good as you're going to get. So, as far as I'm concerned, everybody building them are going to tell us they're homeowner occupied and they're not going to require ROPs, and we won't be in there. We won't know what's happening. I mean, that's my opinion. Especially when the parcel gets sold, everything's up in the air, because I don't know of any legal way we can hold anybody to, homeowner occupied, living on site. The realtor is not obligated to disclose that any better than they are to disclose that illegal conversion has happened. The basement's been finished, the attic's been finished. We just deal with them as they come, and that's a daily thing. So I don't know of any legal avenue that we're going to be able to force anybody to, more than a pinky swear and a promise that they're going to live there and it's their family living there and they're not renting it for less than 30 days.
Any questions? Megan?
Yes. The component around family members, is that part of our local code, or is that state code?
In what regards?
The requirements for the waiver for the requirement for ROPs.
I believe it's in the USDO. That's not something outside of all
So
that I'm aware of.
it would be something that we could structure language in this to require no exemptions for an ROP, which means that for anybody to rent an ADU going forward would routinely have to have an updated occupancy certificate.
Yeah, that's a legal question. I don't know.
Okay, can we take note of that question? For legal counsel.
It seems like a very fair compromise for a lot of the concerns that seem to be coming forward about how this would roll out, that if we were to ensure that these units were routinely inspected by codes and routinely required to have occupancy certificates regardless of who's utilizing those units, it seems like it would resolve a lot of the things that seem to be bubbling up
I would not be opposed to that, because we're talking about life safety. I just don't know, legally, if you'd be able to distinguish between an ADU not being allowed to be homeowner occupied exemption versus the rest of the city. I don't know that answer.
Yeah,
I apologize. Yes, sir.
So-
Yeah, I just said, Tom, I don't know, okay. Gotcha.
If people are watching later, we want them to be able to see who's talking. Thank you.
okay.
And I mean, again, if there's other changes that we need to make to the code to make this work, I think that that's a fair compromise to offer. I'm just wondering where the legal minutia is on that.
So,
Okay, we'll get some legal. I can tell you personally, I would have a problem with that, because I think if you're gonna have a property that's owner occupied and you're gonna have someone from your family living there, other than getting it inspected when it's getting built and getting taken care of, I wouldn't want the government coming into my house, every 2 years and bothering my family member. That's just me, so I think, but we can talk about it. I think that's just part of the conversation. So I don't think it's as easy as saying we're going to make every ADU, or anytime anyone has family member living in their home, have to no longer have to get the inspection, because it's an inconvenience for families, I think. And I think one of the goals is to make it so families feel more comfortable living with families, while we try to deal with making it owner occupied, which I do believe it should be owner occupied. So I think I'm open to finding a compromise, and I hope we can. I'm gonna let Rich go on that.
I just want to clarify that. I mean, in terms of the ROP, it's a requirement. If the unit's going to be rented, it's required to have an ROP. If you're renting to a family member, wouldn't it require an ROP?
Well, I don't remember the exact language. If it's immediate family member,
Okay.
no
No.
ROP required.
Even
But-
if that immediate family member is paying rent and has a lease?
Right, but I can tell you, practically speaking,
Yeah.
if somebody tells me it's their family member living there, we're not comfortable
Right.
asking what's that relation? Are
Okay.
you second cousins? If you're a family member and you sign the affidavit, we're not charging you and we're not doing the ROP inspection.
Okay.
Just gonna
Now,
add
I
that.
also want to give some information. If you don't have an ROP in the city of Albany, you cannot evict a tenant. So it would be because that would be it would be in the investors, if you're going to rent it out, to get an ROP, if it's not your family. Where it's different, most of us are not going to evict our family members.
Depends.
Well, sometimes most of us we're not going to. So I think that's where the difference is, where if we want to look at the ROP as a way to make it so that we can encourage it to be owner occupied, I'm not against that, but I wouldn't want it, I'd want us to have more conversation. I don't want to dominate the conversation. Tom?
Thank you, and thank you, Rick. I have a couple of questions about enforcement. When I first moved to Albany 36 years ago, there was a thing called a grouper law, and it was really aimed at the students, that you wouldn't have 10 students living in one apartment. But what I've come to learn, and I just would like a little bit more clarification, it's really unenforceable. You can't go in and say, are you related, or are you, renting? Am I right with that?
Correct. Yeah, we have not cited under the grouper law in my tenure, primarily for that reason. We don't ask the relation. If you're telling us your family, it infringes on their rights to even, tell us that. So upon advice from Corporation Counsel, we don't use that. But I will tell you, if overcrowding is the issue, there is a separate, there are other codes that we can use, that, you get to the same result, but specifically with the grouper law, we do not enforce that.
Okay, and then the next thing is, I just want to briefly talk about is, I posted this up on social media, which I don't use too often, but I did for this instant, trying to get some feedback. And most of the feedback where people want to do it, they want to rent. It's not for relatives. There was a few people said, yeah. My concern is with the Airbnbs. And I sent out to the full council today, there's just a case now in Dutchess County where a couple is being charged with manslaughter because they didn't have smoke detectors, they didn't have fire extinguishers in their Airbnb. And, you know, there's a real danger there. And a lot of people would look at this as, you know, money-making for profit, not just to help a relative out or, you know, they're doing it for profit. So until we have, you know, the county is looking at, it's an opt-out program in the county for the Airbnbs, but we don't really have anything in the city kind of regulating Airbnbs and how we would identify them. Now, this legislation does talk about no rentals, you know, less than 30 days, but my question is, how do you enforce something like that?
Again, that was my only comment in the entire thing, is we don't have any way to verify. I mean, other than asking them, are you using it as a short-term rental, and the owner telling us yes or no, we have no ability to know what they're doing with it. Other than, you know, unless, you know, there's an incident and the police are called and, you know, the person occupying states, oh, it's a rental. But even at that point, you know, I mean, I think based on this, we'd have some avenue to be able to cite something, but there's no way to prevent it from happening.
Or how do you prove it?
Ahead of time, correct, yeah. Again, if, once somebody, all we can do is ask, and based on what they tell us is what we have to go by.
Okay, and, you know, I don't know if you would know this answer. Insurance, that if you put up the separate unit, whether it's for a relative or you're renting it, I have Allstate insurance. I talked to the manager today there, and he said, you really need insurance on both. I mean, nobody's forcing you to get insurance, but if somebody gets hurt, you're liable. So, you know, I don't know if you've had any experience with that at all.
Yeah, I'm unaware of any way for us to enforce somebody having insurance. You know, if there were, I'd wave my wand and I'd make sure everybody had renters insurance, you know, because what we see after, you know, something catastrophic is they're out of everything with no recourse. But no, we would have no way to.
And I wasn't expecting you to, but I was just bringing it up because I know you deal with it a lot in the city. Right. Like if somebody gets hurt on my property or in the, you know, in the accessory dwelling unit, am I covered? Even a relative. Relatives will sue another relative. I've seen it happen, unfortunately, but, you know, that's the nature of our world. But, and maybe I need to get more information on that for the group. There was one more thing, and I just can't think of it, but thank you for your time, Rick.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? I got one question, Rick. Would it be possible to put something in the bill that says we limit it to just one ROP, meaning they could only rent out one of the two dwellings?
Well, that already exists. So in a homeowner-occupied situation where the owner lives in one unit and rents out the other, we only conduct the ROP inspection in the, you know, in that one unit, not the homeowner's unit.
But I guess my question is, could we limit the number of ROPs? I think some of the questions that we're getting is, how do we make sure that it's owner-occupied? How do we encourage that it's owner-occupied? And I think by limiting it to just one ROP, it would mean they could only rent one without having the risk of having difficulty evicting somebody without an ROP.
Yeah, I'm not sure legally. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Thank you. I guess we'll add that to Corporation Council's list. Thank you, Rick. Any other questions? Megan.
Wouldn't that be implied because the legislation requires that this be an owner-occupied only property? So wouldn't we only be issuing one ROP for a property with an ADU regardless, essentially?
Yeah. I believe so.
But you just said if there was a relative, you wouldn't need it.
Correct.
but that's my point, is that if the property were to turn over hands, right? I have a single-family home, I build an ADU on my property, I decide to sell my property, somebody else buys it as an investment property, thinking that they're going to rent out both the house and the ADU. Because we wrote into the legislation that it has to be owner-occupied, my assumption would be that codes would only be able to issue one ROP for that property.
You're
makes
correct. I just don't know, for the person that decides to sell it and somebody just occupies it, what do you do then? I mean, they're not going to move into their, it'll be very hard to enforce once somebody sells it and it changes hands, I think.
But you know, that's actually a good way of getting to the requirement that even if it's sold, it has to be, because if you know there's an ADU there, it's sold to someone who wants to rent both units. When they come to you to get a ROP, your records will indicate, well, there's already one ROP there because there's an ADU. We can't issue you another one, and therefore you can't rent that.
Well,
I mean, is that?
No, you're right,
Yeah.
but so what?
Well,
What
it's
if
an
they do?
enforcement
Yeah, correct.
mechanism in a
Right.
sense, because then they can't, legally, they can't rent without the ROP, which you can't issue, because you can only issue one to that property since there's an ADU in the primary residence.
You're right, as long as they comply.
Well, that's the whole other issue, yeah. But
I guess my question is, do we need to put that specifically in the legislation to make sure that it's clearly understood?
Sorry, but it's already there. I think what Rick is saying is that people could live there without an ROP. Right?
Correct.
Yeah. But as far as like one avenue that we could take is, you know, is yes, the property can only be issued one ROP. Whether or not they comply. So it's already in the, I think it's understood in the legislation.
Okay. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm trying to come up creatively of how do we address some of the concerns that are being brought up.
Alfredo?
Okay. Yes.
And on this subject, would it be put into the deed? Like, if I went to buy, you have a house for sale with an ADU in the back, and I'm assuming, oh, I could just rent these both out, and I don't know that that's not allowed, that it's owner occupied. How do we let the buyer know? I know it's, you know, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, but is there somewhere that we can put in, like, the deed when they do research on the sale? I'm just curious about that. Rick, do you know, or?
Yeah, I don't know.
Typically,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
No, yeah, I
I
don't
was
know.
gonna say typically, at least if you're getting a mortgage, the companies will check, they'll ask us for a zoning compliance certificate of something to that effect. You know, cash sales, that's a little bit different, but usually the mortgage entity is doing their due diligence to make sure what you're buying it for is how it can be used. So that does cover a lot of those cases.
Yeah, I just feel bad, somebody bought a place and found out now they can't rent both. Now they're stuck with it, but thank you.
We do encounter that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, and now we're gonna wrap it up with our water department. Thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you for inviting me here tonight. We don't really have a stance on the ordinance. One thing that, of course, we'd like to sell more water. That's probably a given. But the one thing that we would really like to clarify from an expectation perspective, in a detached ADU, we would really strongly suggest and require a separate metered water connection and a sanitary sewer connection. That's for reliability. Things can happen in the primary unit that if something happens there, you're going to potentially not have service in the ADU. So I think just from a practical standpoint and a risk minimization, we would really strongly suggest and almost require a separate metered water connection and sanitary sewer. And even when you look from the perspective of a future council may modify that and have maybe more relaxed perspective on how that ADU might be used. And in that case, if you really want it to be a separate independent unit, you'd really want to have that separate utility connections. And that's really all we have really to offer on the ordinance.
Questions? Tom?
Yeah, Joe, and thank you again for coming. If, right now, so you don't have to run a separate line, but say you were tying into the main house line and there's lead service, is that something that we would force the person doing the work to replace that lead line?
Well, again, if the ADU is part of the existing structure, you're doing like an addition, a traditional addition it's an attached structure, we don't get involved in that at all. And from a practical standpoint, all the lead lines are going to get replaced at some point anyway. But if you have a garage or a detached structure, you want to make a modification, we would really require a separate metered water connection and sanitary sewer. The difficulty in potentially plumbing then into an existing sewer is problematic. The water service that was put in might be a 3/4 inch water service. And if you start putting an addition on, running that additional footage out to the detached unit, you probably would have a pressure loss. So you really would need a new water service.
Rick?
Just to add to that for Joe, Commissioner Coffey, if you think about it also, if the primary structure were to have a catastrophic fire or something that were to make that unsafe, unfit, and we had to, displace everybody, you really don't want to be forced to displace somebody in a, habitable space. So those separate, and you could think of power, the same, should have probably its own power as well for those same reasons. If something happens to one, you don't want it to affect the non-attached or detached structure.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for any of the department heads that we have here with us today? Okay, I want to really thank you all for taking your time to meet with us. I'm going to ask you could just wait another 5 minutes. We have one public comment that I'd like to at least have everyone here, just so that, if there's any information that or any concerns, we can maybe answer those questions. And I want to thank the public comment community member who waited, until we finished this part. But I really wanted to make sure. I knew we had some staff that had to go. Wanted to make sure we were able to get all the staff in. So if we could get that public comment.
Just for reference, we do have 2 people who signed up.
Okay.
First one up was Karen Schuback. Okay. Next up was Bruce Mestorovich.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes to speak your comment. Now, just so you understand the process, no one, if you ask any questions, no one can answer your comments. It's just you giving us your feedback.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, my name is Bruce Mostorovich. I live at 152 Washington Avenue. So currently, I'm renting an apartment, but I'm actually been shopping for houses. I'm actually under contract right now trying to buy a duplex. Hopefully, that'll go through in the next month. I'd love to build one of these. I know duplexes are not included in the current bill, but I think a lot of the people who would be interested in building one of these are the kind of people that are buying a duplex or a triplex to live in a unit and rent out one of the others already. I think if you're limiting it just to single-family homeowners, a lot of that crowd, I think, if they'd have wanted a rental unit, they would have bought a duplex, because we do have that stock around here. So if you really want to grow your housing supply, I'd like to see duplexes kind of included in the options on that. Obviously, a lot of properties, the yards aren't going to be big enough, it's not going to work, but in the areas where it does, I think it could be great. Duplexes also tend to be closer to public transit lines, so I'm really excited. My new home's going to be right on, a little bit off of Madison Avenue, so pretty close to the 910 route that I take to work. Also close to the Uptown Belt line, the Madison Avenue line. I think they're just really good places where we could get, use as much housing as we can get. Other than that, appreciate all the discussion. I'd love to see some kind of pamphlet on kind of what all this means. I was trying to go through and kind of compare the ordinance to the zoning code, which is pretty hard to navigate. So if there's a way you guys could get together for one of the future presentations, like 2 or 3, I don't know, page report on the setback will be this many feet, whatever details, just to make it a little easier to understand, I think that'd be great. I know you guys kind of got into a lot of the regulations side of things today, so I'm hoping, you know, maybe the next 2 sessions, it's more discussion about how do we get more housing. But I love the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, and congratulations on your purchase. I myself am a big fan of buying duplexes, so congratulations and good luck with that. Okay, any other questions or comments on this issue? Okay, with that, I want to thank the staff. I really appreciate many of you coming in late this evening after a long day. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for taking this time to be with us. And we hope to see you again, and hope you all have a healthy rest of your week. We've got updates on ordinance 175324. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the ordinance regarding the requirement for cabaret and accessory entertainment, again, just wanted to update everyone kind of where we were in our latest conversations in this draft that has been provided to you all this evening. Looking at the ordinance of 1753-24, again, one of the things that we are trying to solve and address is, again, repealing the application process that owners have to go through, which is, again, as we spoke about before, redundant in information and verification of things that our departments already either have information on or has already been provided to some type of municipality or agency. So this removes that layer of the application process to streamline businesses to be able to have entertainment. In the ordinance, again, we lay out and outline the new definition of what a accessory entertainment is and considered, as well as what falls under that. In our discussions in the past several months, we've gone through several different drafts in order to end up in this conversation. We at one point had a draft that allowed for the much larger repeal, but since then, again, we've just focused on the application process and allowed other department entities to be able to provide that same type of function, whether it's now under this ordinance draft, the Board of Zoning Appeals, who will have the duty to hear and decide of appeals. So we're now shifting the focus to clarifying the enforcement side of things and making sure that the definitions are clear as to what constitutes as a accessory entertainment throughout the city of Albany. In doing so, we've also tied our outdoor cafe section back into the USDO to make sure that the times all align with each other. So it's not any extended times that are going past what the USDO already allows for those district and areas. Also still included in this process, while the application process is looking to be removed, all departments that were previously involved in the application process are still going to be notified and involved with the enforcement side. So if there's a business place that's having issues, again, the now neighborhood services will be able to further assist with posting that information online. So again, just to quickly go through this, but the planning department, Albany Police, fire department, law department, city clerk, common council members, business improvement districts, as well as every neighborhood association. So all departments that were previously involved are still currently involved in notifying and being notified of what's happening at said location if there are any issues. Also to mention, there's still the general requirements that is presented here that again still enforces the business owner to receive warnings. If the warning is not followed through with or adhered to, then again we will have our building and codes provide a cease and desist that will be given to the owner. We've also reduced the amount of warnings from previous drafts to go to, I believe, 3 warnings. So again, if this person has received 3 warnings within this certain amount of time, then they will receive the stop or cease and desist order, excuse me. So again, to wrap this up, I think in our previous discussions with either staff members or departments, we've had a shift in the maybe perspective as to what is best when it comes to the legislation, and I think that just comes down to the slight difference of perspective of what we're trying to aim at. So again, and please remember that this process was about, again, reducing and minimizing the red tape people are having to go through, which was that application process. So that's what the focus was, still is. There are other drafts that are out there, but I wanted to take the time, and Councilmember Flynn wanted to take the time to at least present the update as to what has been going on. There's a lot more to explain, but to keep it short, this is where we are today, the draft that is sitting in front of you. Asking everyone to please take the time to read through it. If you do have questions, please reach out to myself, Councilmember Flynn, or any of the staff to address any of your concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. I do want to let the body know, so there's a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes trying to get a compromise, and a lot of individuals were brought to the table, and I'm very appreciative of everyone who came to the table and their willingness. No, I got you. Everyone's willingness to come to the table to try to work out some type of compromise. But I think one thing that was clear in those conversations that there's 2 different views on how we should move forward. One, that we should modify the licensing system, and the 2, that we should have a as-is system where someone has as-is rights to be able to use their property, and then if they violate it, then they lose those rights. So, you know, we had some good conversations, and again, I'm very appreciative of everyone who came to the table in those multiple meetings to try to find a compromises. But sometimes we don't get the compromise that we would like, and we've got to, you know, allow council members to move forward with what they want to move forward with, but that also means other council members can move forward with what their vision is. So, and then we discuss it in a democratic form, and we put down a vote on each proposals. I'm going to allow Mr. Khan.
Yeah, without getting into discussion, I won't get into discussion of the elements, but we were having, I thought, some productive conversations that were moving in a direction that would provide quicker relief and streamlining, which I do support. Disappointed that we're going back to the same proposal that at the last planning committee meeting, when this was discussed and the public was here, it didn't seem to have support. But And I think there are a lot of problematic provisions and enforcement provisions in it, but I know we're not going to have discussion, but just that there will be a later time when we can discuss the various approaches. But, I just wanted to note that.
And I appreciate it again. I always try to find compromises, and, I have to accept that sometimes we can't find that compromise, and we've got to allow members to put their vision forward and have those two visions discussed publicly as we move forward. But thank you again for everyone who put a lot of time into it, and I want to thank the sponsors and Councilman McConty and the department heads that were all involved in that process, to try to find a compromise on this. I want you all to know that we appreciate that time that was put into it. Any other questions or comments before we move forward? Okay, can I get a movement?
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Wait, can I get a vote? Do I need a vote to adjourn? Okay, everyone in favor to adjourn?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you everyone who joined us. Have a good day.